1863, a special train had come up from Washington, bringing a mighty important man who had a speech to make at a place called Gettysburg. Today, Gettysburg lies peaceful and quiet in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But what happened there some time back is history. Not far from Gettysburg, there's a great valley lying astride, calling it the Cumberland, and another south, the Shenandoah. And at Harper's Ferry, right where the valleys meet, a grave and tragic conflict springs to life.
I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood.
John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, but it marched on above the great valley, anticipating a deadly struggle between two ways of life. For the valley flowed north into an area both agriculturally rich and industrially productive. A land where factories were becoming part of the landscape. But in the southern part of the valley and the land beyond, a way of life depending on the hand labor of slaves. A different way of life that seemed to call for a different kind of government.
This union was established on the right of state to do as it pleased on the question of slavery and every other question.
A house divided against itself cannot stand.
April 12th, 1861. Confederate guns fire on Fort Sumter. The war had come. South Carolina had seceded from the Union in December of 1860, and 6 other slave states had soon followed. But the state of Virginia hesitated, even after Sumter, and whether it would secede or not was of grave concern to a Virginian named Robert E. Lee.
If Virginia stands by the old Union, so will I. But if she secedes, then I will follow my native state with my life.
And so when Virginia seceded, 5 days after Sumter, the North lost more than a state. It lost a general.
Through a mistake we lost Bull Run 3 Bulls, says I. Through a mistake we lost Bull Run 3 Bulls, says I. Through a mistake we lost Bull Run, and we all skedaddled to Washington. And we'll all drink stone blind. Johnny, come fill the bowl.
Neither side had wanted it, but the first battle was at hand. And man or boy, Johnny Reb or Billy Yank, each soldier faced his own worst moments alone, waiting. The raw northern troops hadn't meant to run that day, but run they did. It wasn't going to be a short war. Bull Run was a defeat for the North, but not a decisive one. And by the spring of '62, McClellan, now with a tough and disciplined army, the Army of the Potomac, embarked aboard a huge fleet of wooden ships to the James River for a drive on Richmond. Hard fighting brought the Union Army to within 4 miles of Richmond, the heart and symbol of the Confederacy. But with victory almost within his grasp, McClellan learned that his own capital was threatened by Confederate cavalry. They were stopped by Union forces, but McClellan, despite his superior numbers, was defeated by Lee in a series of battles known as 7 days. Richmond was still threatened, but for that matter, so was Washington. Thus, the war in the East was indecisive. But things were going differently in the West. Here, where broad rivers cut into the Confederacy, An unknown Union general had surrounded. Commander asked this unknown for terms. The reply was,
"No terms except unconditional surrender."
an unconditional surrender grant it was from that day on. But Ulysses S. Grant was not always to have things on his own terms. One Sunday morning in early April at his headquarters, Grant's forces had been surprised, and thus began the terrible Battle of Shiloh. 40,000 Confederates pressed the Union troops to the very edge of the river, towards what looked like inevitable disaster. But Federal reinforcements arrived overnight, reinforcements which turned the tide of the battle. And when it was over, the Union Army held the ground, but at a cost more terrible than could be imagined. General Grant looked over the field.
I looked at a field over which the Confederates had made charges the day before, so covered with dead.
Now, after more than a year of hostilities, the grand strategy of the North began to emerge. Total blockade on the sea, and the splitting of the Confederacy by way of the western rivers. Thus, the West was to prove crucial in this war between North and South. But Lee in the East was a general to be reckoned with. He had crossed the Potomac just above Washington, and early in September of '62, his army met McClellan's at a place called Antietam Creek. And in 2 days, the cornfields of Maryland became one of the bloodiest battlefields of the entire war.